My name is Nicole Acevedo. I am a reporter for NBC News Digital, NBC Latino, and I'm very happy to be moderating this panel here with the Senator and with Iram. And first up, I'm just gonna call Hector Sanchez, if he's around. Yes.
Buenas noches, LCLAA. Nueva York.
Yeah.
It's great to be here on a rainy day, but it's clear that nothing stops the LCLAA chapter of New York.
Right.
It's a clear example of all the work that you guys do over here in the city. I just wanna, first of all, recognize our great president, brother Rosario, for putting this event together.
Yeah.
And for taking the leadership, brother. We talk about the importance of this issue. We always been very clear. For us, the top priority are Puerto Rican workers. And this is why we must have difficult conversations. This is why we must really understand the different issues, the different elements that are playing at any time, especially after this horrible hurricane, to understand how can we be the best advocates that we can be as an organization, always putting Puerto Rican workers first. And this is the approach that we're taking today with this conversation. I also want to recognize our executive board members of National LCLAA, starting with our Secretary Treasurer, Jose Vargas, brother. Thank you for all the work that you do. Nelson Rivera, brother Nelson. And obviously, Iram Ramírez is also with the National Board of Organization. What a critical time to be part of LCLAA, brothers and sisters. At a time when literally everything that we represent is under attack. Labor is under attack. Latinos are under attack. Immigrants are under attack. Puerto Ricans are under attack. All the values that we bring to the table are under attack. But this is why the work that we do is so critical. And this is why our unity is more important than ever, because at a time when we face so many challenges and attacks, there are also unique opportunities to keep organizing, to keep mobilizing, to keep resisting, to continue engaging. And this is what we do. And we are the best to do this because we've been trained by the labor movement, we've been trained by unions, we've been trained by the entities that historically led the way to create a middle class, led the way for workers' rights, led the way for human rights, led the way for civil rights. This is who we are. So we are needed more than ever to continue this fight. And even though we're facing some of the worst attacks in the history of our nation, with the most anti-immigrant, the most anti-Puerto Rican, the most anti-Latino president that we have seen in the history of our nation, we are saying presente, and we have seen drastic increase on the way we mobilize. We have seen increase, especially in cities like this one, that we have more Latinas running for office and getting elected, actually the youngest Latina in the history. Actually, the youngest member of Congress ever elected comes from this amazing city. But we have seen that all over the nation. We have seen people organizing. We have seen the numbers of voter registrations. We've seen GOTV. We've seen all the civic participation increasing because at a time, as I say, that we're facing these challenges, we embrace the most important elements of our democracy. And this is what we're doing, representing with our democratic values, engaging in civic participation. And when it comes to the amazing island of Puerto Rico, when it comes to the amazing brothers and sisters of Puerto Rico, this organization has also been in the front lines. We have always put Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican workers as a priority. We were there not long ago, and I had the honor to be into Puerto Rico representing LCLAA. This is my 10th year as an executive director of LCLAA. And I remember so many battles that we have engaged with over there in Puerto Rico. Something that comes to mind immediately is the Public Law 7. All of us engaging in trying to advance and protect the workers' rights of Puerto Rican workers. But last year was different, brothers and sisters. After the horrible hurricane that landed in our beautiful island of Puerto Rico, we needed to be there. And LCLAA decided before the hurricane to go to Puerto Rico for our national convention. And the hurricane made it very hard and made it very, very difficult to go to the island, literally because there was no infrastructure for us to host our convention. But our national board came together and said, it doesn't matter how we're going to get it done. We're going to go to Puerto Rico. Even if we have to sleep under a beautiful palapa over there, we'll figure it out, but we will go to the island. We will send a national message that we're going to be there in solidarity, that we're going to be there shoulder to shoulder with the Puerto Rican workers, brothers and sisters, and we're going to be there supporting the top priorities of the island. And at the end, we had an amazing convention with almost 500 people. We didn't have capacity at the end. We had to get another hotel. We had to do a lot of different things to make sure that we went to Puerto Rico, but it was just at a personal level so amazing to be able to collaborate with brothers and sisters in the island and see the resilience after this hurricane to say, we're ready. We're ready to continue. We're ready to welcome you. And we're ready to make this an amazing convention. And in that context, we restructure everything that we did in the convention because we wanted to make sure that we were outside, that we were on the streets, that we were putting un granito de arena, that we were contributing to the island. So we did 5 projects. Remember, something that we do in LCLAA is we have skills. So we have people from the different unions with skills that could put those skills directly to help in one way or another over there in the island. And I remember all the different projects because we had to really plan them. I remember a small bridge that was actually flowing one of the small cities, small pueblitos close to San Juan, and we had some of the people from La Yuna kind of taking the leadership over there in that project, and also with our family from the Machines kind of helping with that bridge. Then we went and we coordinated with all the teachers. We adopted one school, literally was destroyed. We literally rebuilt that school to make sure that it was ready to host some almost, I think, like 40 to 50 sisters that urgently need a location because they were facing a lot of personal challenges, and we were there. And we did other projects. The point is that we were on the ground, we were contributing, and yes, we contributed for the amazing people of Puerto Rico, but everybody told us it was so powerful just to be there, and it was so powerful to be connected. We had a conversation of some of the top priorities, and this is an issue that came to the table. And it's an issue that we really need to be open about discussing. And every time I face something that is difficult, now or when I was the chair of NHLA, which is the coalition of all the 46 different organizations, something that became really political, something that became maybe divisive, I always ask one question: what is the best for the people that we're representing or that we're supposed to represent? And with that, I ask everybody in this room to have that in mind when we're having difficult conversations, when things may be political, when there are so many interests on the table. Ask the question, what is the best for the people that we are supposed to represent an organization? And it's with that approach that I would like to start this conversation. But before we do that, I want to remind you that we have a conference around the corner, and it's not too far away from here. We know New York has been always an amazing chapter. And by the way, New York was the chapter that was representing and took the most people over there to Puerto Rico. So give a round of applause to amazing chapter of New York. Was actually, you guys made it harder because I needed to find another hotel to be able, no, but it was just amazing. People just saying, what else can we bring? I remember somebody proposed, let's all go there and let's bring an extra bag with the stuff that we can help the community over there. And there were so many amazing ideas, and we've implemented many of those ideas. but all of you in New York were critical in putting together that convention. So we invite you to Philadelphia, August 15th to the 17th, here around the corner. We're going to continue having a lot of the critical conversations of the top priorities in the nation, obviously approaching 2020. And we hope to see you there. And Puerto Rico is going to be part of the agenda. With that, thank you, everybody. And I'm going to pass it on to you, sister.
Thank you. Yes. I don't know if Eduardo wants to give you also a message. Eduardo, the president of the New York City chapter. Yes.
Muchísimas gracias. How's everybody doing? Good to see so many beautiful faces. Welcome, everybody. And the New York City chapter welcomes everybody that may be viewing out in social media world as well. This discussion, I want to just share with you its origins. This discussion flows from our national convention that was held in August last year in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we're thankful and give thanks to Janira Merino, who motivated the point that we needed to have this open discussion on the Jones Act. Because this is a very important issue for everyone that's here. That's why we're here to listen. That's why we have our presenters before us, because they take this issue to heart. When we were organizing and preparing for tonight, we also tried very hard to try to find somebody that was a neutral, someone that would present a perspective, you know, on economics and so forth, and not necessarily for or against the Jones Act. So that did not happen. But what did happen, what is going to happen is I want to share with you the reason why this is such important discussion specific to the New York City chapter of LCLAA and to many of the LCLAA members of this region and elsewhere throughout the country. When I had these discussions regarding the Jones Act with the national leadership, I explained to them, the members who I am obligated to serve and to represent, that within our chapter in New York City, there are people that are for the Jones Act, there are people that are opposed to the Jones Act, and there are people that are undecided. And that is precisely the reason why the position of our chapter here in New York City is when it comes to the question of the rights and protections for the seafaring and maritime trades, we are 100% for those rights and protections. In fact, our official position that those rights and protections need to be expanded. But when it comes specifically to the punitive surcharges, taxes that are imposed upon the economy of Puerto Rico, that's where there's an issue that we have and that we need to have a discussion that we do not have agreement on. And our analogy, when we in our discussions, we always compared the Jones Act to the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act. Now, some people say, well, how do you make that connection? If some of you may or may not know, but the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act codified a tremendous gain of the labor movement, where we gained the rights to be able to have at an equal footing at the table to articulate and fight and battle and negotiate better health coverage for our members as trustees to major health and welfare funds that many of our unions participate in. But unfortunately, Taft-Hartley also codified right to work. And it was based on that analogy how we are for the rights and protections of the workers codified in the Jones Act, but are not in favor, many of us, for the punitive taxes, surcharges, and tariffs that are imposed upon the people and nation of Puerto Rico. And the question of jobs is a very important question, but we also want to talk about Puerto Rico because we have our newsletter that many of you have here and that's been circulated. And if you don't have one, please feel free to take one and take one home and read at your leisure. But we also feel when it comes to the question of jobs, that jobs for our economy in Puerto Rico and the jobs for Puerto Ricanos in the seafaring and maritime trades also needs to be part of that discussion. So on that note is precisely the reason what got us to this point right here, right now, where we have these distinguished presenters with us today that we're so honored and very fortunate to have with us. So I want to say thank you for all of you. It's going to be a very lively educational discussion and exchange that our presenters will share from their perspectives and from their heart. They're going to share what the position and the way forward should be. So on that note, welcome everyone. And thank you so much for your time. Hermana Nicole.
Thank you. Awesome. So we're going to kick off our very, very honest and frank presentation and conversation about the Jones Act and really dive deep on what helps and what hurts Puerto Rico when it comes to this law. So Iram Ramírez, you're the Senior International Representative Office on Professional Employees International Union, right? And I just want, so people get to know you a little bit. What is your stance on the Jones Act and just what's your first hand pitch when it comes to what the law does to Puerto Rico? Does it hurt? Does it help? Is it both?
I think primero que nada, buenas noches a todos, compañeros, compañeras. Gracias por estar aquí, hermanos y hermanas. The first thing when I think about the Jones Act, I think the same way that I think about every single legislation that have been approved from Congress to Puerto Rico. There's not a single piece of legislation that has been approved by the U.S. that favors Puerto Rico. Because every single piece of legislation from Foraker, the Jones Act that gave us the citizenship, Ley 600, de crearon el Estado Libre Asociado, now Promesa, is not looking for the best interest in Puerto Rico. It's looking from the interest of the United States within Puerto Rico. And of course, the Jones Act is a protective act that was created at one point, one set of circumstances that are not longer there. But for me, when I talk about the Jones Act, I was really opposed at one point. But then it came to the question that was presented, what about the workers? And that's the thing that is missing from the conversation. Because usually people don't remember where the whole conversation against the Jones Act started. And it was from people that believe in free market, deregulation. Just to give you an example, the main think tanks against the Jones Act are the Cato Institute, the Manhattan Institute, and the Heritage Foundation. And you all know them, especially because all of them are in favor of right-to-work states. Most of those people are really in favor. So when it comes to the Jones Act, I am not in favor of the Jones Act, and I am not opposed to the Jones Act. I am kind of that middle ground situation because the way that I'm seeing it, I'm seeing through the eyes of the workers. And I don't think that is going to be the only thing that will help the Puerto Rican situation. It's just one of those things that it needs to be talked about, really discussed, and we have to take the noise out of the whole discussion and to look into it.
I'm gonna pass it along to Senator Rossana. Rossana, same question. I know that you have a wonderful presentation that it's kind of explain a little bit about this, but also so people can get a sense what helps, what hurts Puerto Ricans with this law.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing me the opportunity. Thank you to the President and the Executive Director to have me here. For me, it's like the colleague here is a situation when you put yourself trying to understand your people, trying to do the best that you want to do, trying to open your mind to understand every detail, every statistics, and every study that have been done about the Jones Act. The Jones Act have been a lot of timing trying to understand what is the purpose, is working, is not working, is heading San Juan or Puerto Rico, or is not heading San Juan and Puerto Rico. For me, is not hitting Puerto Rico, is hitting each of the person of Puerto Rico. I will explain that. I will explain that with facts, with evidence. I have been working in this topic for more than 19 years. You will ask how a gerontologist have been working with the topic of Jones Act. When I start studying the Jones Act, I will start looking why the pharmaceuticals and the medication were so expensive for a lot of people or elderly people in Puerto Rico. I get in the Jones Act because that, and I found it out. One example, why, if Puerto Rico have the main pharmaceuticals that made the 7 medication that is more used in United States and in Puerto Rico, that they develop it there, they come here, and then when it goes to Puerto Rico, it goes to the triple cost. Why is that? Since that, I've been working in this topic. So today, I will bring you information that will explain every detail about the Jones Act, but at the same time, I'm asking you to open your mind, to evaluate, critical every information, and then you decide. Because it's something that you need to put out the noise, but at the same time, you need to put your critical eyes in this to decide for yourself.
Awesome. So, right, I think that a lot of the... Aquí yo creo que hay otro... A ver si funciona. Lo apagué. Mira, a ver si este funciona. Hey, yeah. Yeah, everybody has a mic. So, you know, when we talk about this, the Jones Act, what do you consider are the biggest kind of myths that are put out there or misconceptions that are put out there that people sometimes, you know, might get confused on what it is that the Jones Act does in Puerto Rico? Any misconceptions that are prevalent that hurt having conversations about the topic?
Usually, and I think the biggest misconception is that every single good that comes to the island has to be brought in by U.S. ships, and that's not correct. Actually, 60% of all the vessels coming to the island are non-U.S. flag. Another misconception is that notion that everything has to be put out of the ship, put into a different ship, and sent back to the island. That is not correct. The shipping company is a really complex and difficult situation. One of the situations that happen in Puerto Rico, and I have seen it, even a small business don't understand the shipping
industry or complex.
How it works.
Yeah.
The logistics. And I will give you an example. You know what bundlers are? Bundlers are like in Puerto Rico, we use 53 feet containers. They are huge. This is, if you have enough goods to fill that container, you go to one of the shipping companies, buy that container, and sends the goods. So because they don't understand it, and this is one of the problems, one of the many problems in Puerto Rico, small businesses are not educated, they go to one of the bundlers who actually buy that container from the main shipping companies, and they're doubling the shipping cost because they're paying for somebody else who already bought that. So one of the biggest misconceptions is the idea that every single vessel that comes to the island is a U.S. flag under the Jones Act. And like 66% of them are not under the Jones Act. So I think that's the biggest misconception. There's a lot of things that people believe about the Jones Act, and they don't know it. For instance, most of the food, especially meat, doesn't come from the U.S., come from Latin America. So it's used under non-U.S. flags, vessels. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Most of the people believe that every single ship that is in the San Juan port is from the U.S., and that is not correct. If you go now to the San Juan port, you will see vessels from different nationalities, from Russia, from China, from Argentina, from every single place in the world. Like most of the cement that is used in the island come from Mexico right now. If you go, actually like 2 weeks ago, there was a huge shipping container there. It came from China, filled with goods from China. So there's a lot of people that don't understand how the Jones Act actually works and actually are overlooking how it actually hurt us. Like the senator was mentioning the whole pharmaceutical situation. The whole situation with the pharmaceuticals, yes, of course, shipping is a huge issue because everything has to be shipped into the island. But I can tell you one of the biggest problems with the medical is the same one that you face here in the States, is the lack of regulation.
And it's interesting, this is a resource for everybody. There's a website that tracks every single float, fleet, boat, embarcación marina of any type in the entire world. It's called marinetraffic.com, and I just kind of looked up before coming here, knowing that we were going to talk about the Jones Act. And aside from all the cruises that were in La Bahía de San Juan, there was like a boat from Singapore that was going to Puerto Rico with like a cargo ship and stuff like that. So if you're ever curious, marinetraffic.com, and you can see every single boat that comes in and out of Puerto Rico. And just to kick it off to the senator here, Senator, I know you have a wonderful presentation, but do you want to answer that question first, and then we can kick it off to your presentation?
Well, I think that is not a misconception. For me, the biggest issue is called money. Money talks. And here is not a situation where you can say United States is gaining in this or Puerto Rico is gaining in this. Both are losing a lot of money. And not money just from the economic development in Puerto Rico. Money from labor, money for people, money for that you can figure out the situation of poverty in Puerto Rico. You need to get all the information. I think that one of the biggest situations here is the lack of information, and information with evidence, and good evidence, because there have been some evidence that is manipulated just to express or explain their point, each of the points. But here, they are two in the middle, like that, like a sandwich, employees and Puerto Ricans. And I think if both get together and get all the information together, we will change our minds about Jones Act. For that, I try to bring a summary of all the information about the Jones Act, because I have a presentation of 70 slices, and I put it in 20, trying to explain to you the most important points that we need to find out, each of us, about the Jones Act. If I can do it now,
By all means.
I will do it later, but. First of all, I just want to point out something. I am not against unions. I don't know if you know that when happens the Public Law 7, like the Eduardo talking before about the Public Law 7 in Puerto Rico, we get a lot of people out of business, out of public service. And I was the only one that raised my voice against the government and against the party at that time. I went to Boston and I won against that. And I didn't won alone. It was 600 employees with me that fight for that. And because of that, I went against my government, the same party that I am now, because when you need to stand before anybody against a human being, you need to do it. And I just want to say that because it's something that is very important. First of all, in this topic of Jones Act, that is a picture after Maria. Imagine for a minute being hit by a natural disaster that leaves you with no electricity, no communications, and limited food or water for months. Not for a week, for months and almost a year. A lot of press explain the delay in all the food, all the water, and all the medications that we need for our people. I went to 39 municipalities trying to keep doing people, to keep working people, to get hope on them. You know that because you experience that a lot of people send a lot of food and a lot of materials and a lot of things to Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rican doesn't get it after Maria. And that happens too. It was real. It was not real. Imagine if we put it everything by airplane. Look the cost if we put it everything by airplane. Puerto Rico doesn't have trains. Our highway is the sea. We don't have other choices. Just sea or by plane. But by plane, it was so expensive at that time. So what happened is that because the Jones Act doesn't have the enough chips to bring all the needs to Puerto Rico, President Trump did what they call administrative extension for 10 days. In 10 days, we get 11 ships, international ships to Puerto Rico. Before that, the company says to a lot of people in Puerto Rico that the international ship doesn't want to go to Puerto Rico. But you know what? In 10 days, 11 ships go to Puerto Rico and help Puerto Rico, and it was not enough. So not just that. One of the companies went to Congress and say to Congress and the president, please don't extend the extension, because if you do that, we will not put money in your campaigns. That is true. You know that is true. But you know what? Campaigns that hurt Puerto Ricans like you and me. Puerto Rico was already in crisis before Hurricane Maria. And maritime transportation is an important contributing factor to us. 90% of the world trade is done by water, so not only cost, but frequency and connectivity are critical for any economy. For an island with no raw materials, it is even more critical if we don't have a cheaper transportation. New York Fed reports in 2011 and in 2014, and the Kruger report in 2015 specifically identify the Jones Act as part of the problem. Puerto Rico needs economic development tools to stop dependency. And I want to stop here and say something. It has been not just one study, more than 12 studies that says that Jones Act goes against the economic development in Puerto Rico. It's not just one. So Puerto Rico needs an economic development tool to stop dependency. And doing something with the Jones Act will cost a thing to United States as opposed to many other proposals. What is the purpose? The discussion here should not be about if. There is a cost, but on determining how much it does cost, it is worth it, or are there better alternatives to achieve its purpose? Who should pay for it? Can we better distribute the weight? Why Puerto Rico need to be the one that pay for everything? Protecting an industry legally needed for national security. It is really to protect maritime or protect the security of Puerto Rico and United States? Do you really think that? Well, I will show you. A former federal maritime commissioner has explained that because Mr. Wesley Jones was from Washington State, the real reason he pretended this amendment in 1920 was to protect his state's railroads systems, making water transportation more costly than rail. And you know what? We don't have trains. This is truly being an impact, forcing to land who should be transported cheaper by sea. But it doesn't have than that. Look this. I just wanted that you look this. A number. If you talk about industry and you put some evidence here, you can see. Let me here because I don't see over there. If you can see that the first table there, graphic, the number of trained and licensed mariners in the country have declined from 61,430 individuals to just 10,000. So we are losing jobs here. But at the same time, the overall U.S. labor force has increased by 225%. So we are losing jobs already with the Jones Act already. So if you look the other, I'm sorry, let me go. Okay. The other graphic, you can see how the overall U.S. labor force has increased by 225%. In the next graphic, flying out, the colleague here says that most of the ships that comes to Puerto Rico are international. Yes or no? You wanna know why? If you look at it at the first graphic there, you can see, and that is not my statistics, they are from MARAD, the Maritime Commission. The average daily operating cost for U.S. flag is higher than foreign flag. You can see there that? If you go to the next one, you can see that U.S. carriers operate 5 times more international ships. But you know what? Todd and Crowley have ships with international flags and U.S. flags. And you know why? they do business in both sides. More expensive with US flags and less expensive with foreign flags. And the chips are from Toad and from Crowley. They are not international. They are Crowley and Toad chips that change the flag. You know what that means. I operate in the international sea, but I operate too in the US Sea. And I get both commerce. So one of the other things that have been said about Jones Act is this. You know how many chips are in the industry with Jones Act? 99. No Jones Act eligible, 82. So what you can say in this is, if you have more Jones Act eligible than not Jones Act eligible, is more commerce and more money with US flags than international flags. Because in many cases they put it together, trying to say, we have a lot of chips, but doesn't say which of them are US flags and which of them are international flags, because they put it together. But the same thing, when you question this, you say, what is the purpose here? And that is one of the questions that we always ask to the Maritime Commission. Why you have more US Jones Act eligibles and then you have no Jones Act eligibles? Is something there that they haven't talked to them or explained to us in this situation? But why it is more urgent now for Puerto Rico than ever before? During the 90s, we lost federal tax incentive, exclusive access to a US market due to NAFTA, incomplete derogation of regulatory changes. You know that they have conviction for price fixing, you know that? And you know who was mostly the commerce with money in the whole nation? Between Puerto Rico and United States. It was not on a road. It was mostly Puerto Rico that get one of the $1.5 billion yearly to United States. But mostly companies, not employees, companies have been explaining or misconception or misunderstanding or mis-statistics to employees. Closing Horizon, the economic depression in 2006, closing Horizon. You know what happened with employees when Horizon goes out of business in Puerto Rico? They leave it alone. All the employees in Puerto Rico without pensions. They were fighting with Horizon in favor of Jones Act. And then when the Horizon goes out of Puerto Rico, they leave it alone. They didn't know even where to call to know about their pensions. So who is the one that is losing here? The employees, not the companies. So at the same time, we have Kruger report that's saying the same thing against that Jones Act, the bankruptcy and Promesa. We have now even explaining with champagne 4 new chips that cost $800 million. Who will be the ones that will pay the chips? Puerto Ricans. They will put it more expensive things to get the cost of the chips. And at the same time, Hurricane Maria in 2017. So we get a lot of things that been hitting Puerto Rico a lot. Then, you want to know about the cost? I will bring you the cost. 151% equals 2.5 times more expensive US flags than non-US. The real effect of the Jones Act was not me. That was statistics. And if you want to find it out about the jobs, look at the bottom. Over 30,000 jobs have been lost in the pork industry. And at the same time, the negative impact on Puerto Rico economy, $1.5 billion for a year. So who are the ones that are losing here? Puerto Ricans and employees, not the companies. So if you go further, and you don't want to trust me, go to the last study done by the Congressional Research Service. Not me. Not me. Studies in Congress. No Puerto Ricans. No unions. The Congress, where the companies put the money. They say Jones Act is against Puerto Rico. But if you want to go further, look this. Why you need to pay for a container that goes from California to Puerto Rico $9,000? And you know what? Every person in Puerto Rico knows what is happening with the port. You know what is happening? Everything that goes to Puerto Rico comes from Jacksonville, Florida. And you know what happened after Maria? They will put in money in companies that pay more, and they put their materials and the food in their containers beside the small business in Puerto Rico. And I don't want to say names here because you know what are the names. They pay more, they get transportation. But if you don't pay, you don't get transportation. And you know what? I hear one person from Crowley that says, I put in my ship whatever I want. Puerto Ricans eat what I want. Puerto Rico put it close the ones that I want. And they use what I want. Nobody told me. I hear it. I hear that. And why do you think that people get things from Jacksonville, especially a small business, put things in Jacksonville and transported to Republic Dominican? Look at it. 9,000 versus 2,000. And then comes with international flag to Puerto Rico. They need to do it. In many occasions, a small business put it all things in a container, and it is equal expensive. So they don't have a choice. The only road that we have is the sea. We don't have trains. So if you go further again, you can see what is cost to the USA. You want to know? So United States is it's been hidden too by Jones Act. The International Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in April 2019 says the total US economy may benefit from an increase in final demand in the range of USD $22 billion, in which the Jones Act domestic bill requirements is eliminated, and USD $74 billion. You wanna know something? The shipyards are not required to be US owned. You know what happened? The 4 ships that I told you before that cost $800 million, the shipyards was owned by Korea. But because they were in United States, they cost the triple. In Korea, it's more cheaper. They have the 90% of the industry of shipyards now. And at the same time, if you want to go further, what it costs to United States? The numbers are there. But why should New York City cares too? Because we are in New York, right? Large Puerto Rican population is losing its direct maritime connection. In 1996, the New York Puerto Rico trade had 6 weekly sailings, 4 with self-propelled vessels and 2 with barges. In 2019, only 1 barge served a week from PA, and that could be preparing to move to Jacksonville. What is the question? Why are not the longshoremen and ports authorities in New Jersey screaming? Answer the question. We're going further, if you like it. Do this. Why do we have discrimination even in United States? Do you see Puerto Rico in this picture? And why is different for the states in different part of the nation? Why New Jersey in many occasions say, hey, why I need to pay more than even California or other states? That is not happening just to Puerto Rico. It's happening too to the United States at the same time. Jobs will be lost? That is the other question. Don't Shermans, there is no reason to conclude that jobs will be lost in the ports. Service follows the cargo, plus we just lost many jobs with the closing of Horizon. Lower transportation costs and new roads can only increase cargo and thus jobs. Mariners, the strongest case will be those on the crew, but the amount of Jones Act ships currently under service and the number of crews, 10,000 or less, used by ships is not comparable to the amount of jobs lost in the island and the U.S. due to the Jones Act. Shipyards. In the case of shipbuilders, employment has been declined for decades since there are few commercial ships construction. Also, because the cost, it took an average of 35 years to renew the fleet service to Puerto Rico. So if they spend on Puerto Rico building new ships in 35 years, they are in real trouble. Only on the contrary, jobs have been declining because of the Jones Act. In any case, studies have been found that if this is the main policy concern, a better approach would be a direct subsidy as opposed to all these regulations that amount to indirect subsidy paid disproportionately by the poorest jurisdiction in the United States. You know who is the poorest jurisdiction in the United States? Puerto Rico. No Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico. Nuestros hermanos y hermanas puertorriqueñas. So, how many are there? You want to see statistics? Look it for you. DC coastals and lakes, just 17.4. Jones Act will only be a fraction of this number that also should be smaller since 2011. What they cannot deny. Sorry, okay, sorry. They were convicted for antitrust and the market were further concentrations. The same carriers currently operate in the Caribbean with international flags. They don't deny they have much greater operational costs, and their actions prove they avoid the U.S. flag when they can so question. When they can, so the question is, how can they argue there is not hearing Puerto Rico? That is the question. Okay. And lastly, in summary, something's gonna give, like the movie. Puerto Rico is the greatest economic depression ever, but Congress complains on the cost of all economic proposals. Excluding Puerto Rico from Jones Act would not have a cost on the federal budget. The market is less supervised than ever. It is more concentrated than ever. Abused market power is real, it's not hypothetical. Costs of transportation are a huge burden and impede a way out of recession. The US is also losing. Who can oppose at least transparency? If there is a sector that needs protection, why should Puerto Rico pay such a lion's share of that burden? Why? Why us? I just want to finish saying this. I come from the grassroots, from a really small town in Puerto Rico. I am 1 in 7 in my family. And during the Hurricane Maria, after the Hurricane Maria, I went to 39 municipalities. I see people die. And today, I still seeing people dying because we cannot go out of the pot. The only proposal that will help Puerto Rico and their economic situation, and at the same time, the social crisis that we have, is by the elimination of the Jones Act. And if you don't trust me, here is my presentation of the 79 slides with all the links, all the statistics, and all the studies that have been done about the Jones Act. Now, with this information, you can decide if you are in favor or against your brothers and sisters from the Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Senator. And Iram, I wanted to kick it for you a little bit. The senator presented some of the numbers in terms of, the jobs that are losing, and I know that you were saying, there's an angle to this issue that is the workers. How, would the Jones Act either protect those workers, that industry, and that decline? What is it? Why is it happening in a way?
Okay. I think one of the first things that we have to clarify is the horizon. I don't know where the senator got the information, but those workers are all under union pensions. So every single one of them knew about the pension and know how to get the information. So I really don't know where she got that information, and we need to clarify that because most were union employees and they have their pension taken care of. So I think that needs to be clarified because it undermines us as unions and the way that we address pensions. One of the things that is not in that presentation is yes, there has been a loss of jobs in the maritime trade. But if you check the statistics, it coincides with the NAFTA trades. Remember when NAFTA was approved, the whole balance of import and export from the US shifted. Not longer we are producing the same amount of goods that we're doing because most of the companies move where? Outside. So right now we are importing more than we used to be exporting. So that's one of the situations why the loss of jobs. If you go back to 96 to 2006, Puerto Rico, you got there were like 4 shipping companies, including Horizon. Most of those vessels was 86% were being shipped back to the US full of goods. Now, less than 20% are actually have something in them because there's nothing being exported back to the US because the whole economic model in Puerto Rico, like Senator was saying, got disrupted when the Section 936 was took out by Bill Clinton. So there's a lot of situation why the jobs loss in the maritime trade has happened. So it's not just because of the Jones Act. When Horizon closed, the fact is that most of those workers were not able to find a new job. They were not able to find a new job. I can tell you 27 different names of people that were making $65,000 a year that were not able to find a job. Only one person was able to keep his job, and he was hired by Ayala. That's the only person that was able because he knew how to operate the system, and he was not replaceable. The other ones, actually one of them is actually vendiendo limbers, and the other one is a disc jockey. Good union jobs were lost when Horizon closed down. So the whole situation for us is, yes, of course, it's cheaper to use US, non-US vessels, but at what cost?
I mean, also, you guys can correct me, you study this way more than I have. What the Jones Act does is that it cannot do 2 consecutive stops in US ports, correct?
That's true.
So it's the argument by getting rid of the Jones Act is that to create an open market that maybe if foreign, not only between US ports, but maybe if a fleet from a different country says, you know what, I'm already going to the US, let me also stop in Puerto Rico and also stop in a different port in the US. Is that the idea? And is there any evidence that shows how that would?
The maritime, of course, the companies, what they're doing is blocking the competition. They don't want somebody getting something from Puerto Rico, then stopping at the Dominican Republic. They don't want that. Of course, they're blocking us, and they don't want any other vessels arriving at the island or dropping in and out goods. So, of course, they are protecting their business. Of course, there's some few vessels right now with U.S. flags, and they do change the flag. But what they're doing is not changing the ship because the ship has to be built in the U.S. They cannot just put in a flag in and out and get that out. It has to be U.S. and U.S. labor. The main reason of the cost, you know what it is. It's called CBAs, Collective Bargaining Agreements.
You were going to say something, Senator?
Yes. 3 things. First of all, evidence, statistics, facts. To do a decision, you need evidence. You need information, first of all. Secondly, we are not asking Todd and Crowley to go out of business. We are telling them, compete. Why, if you are good, why, if you are supposed to be more fast, why, if you are better, you cannot compete? This is easy when you don't compete. You know what happens when you don't compete? You do antitrust. You fix cost. And And the other thing is, they already decide that they are more expensive. But why Puerto Rico need to pay for that? Why? They are losing jobs with Jones Act. And I explained to you and I showed to you statistics, facts, evidence that says that. Where you get information, statistics, facts, evidence that does says a difference in from the statistics that I showed you before. The situation here is that it's more expensive. You know what? I just want to tell you something. ¿Quién le gusta la carne de cabrito aquí? You like cabrito? Very much? Please don't buy it. You know how many days have the cabrito with comes to Puerto Rico? And the people say, fresh cabrito, 69 days to get to Puerto Rico. You know how many days mariscos? Who like camarones? Who like langosta? 26 days to get to Puerto Rico. On average. Since they put it in the chip, I don't count when they kill the cabrito, when they try it out, when they put it in the refrigerator. Yes. And you know what? How many days you get your fresh, esto lo voy a decir en español, quien diga que es fresco es un fresco. 24 days to get your lechuga, tomates, vegetables. That is not quality. And that happens because New Jersey closed, and then we get everything from California. And you matas el cabrito, cortas el cabrito, refrigeras el cabrito, lo montas en el truck del cabrito, lo pones en una nevera del cabrito, lo sacas de California, lo traes a Jacksonville, lo pones en otra nevera y lo traes a Puerto Rico. El que diga que es un cabro fresco es un fresco. ¿Ok? And one thing more, with losing jobs. They are losing jobs. Claro.
You said about 26 people lost their jobs in Puerto Rico due to Horizon. And this is a leading question. How many people are employed because of total currently, because of the commerce to Puerto Rico right now?
Commerce meaning the
maritime due to the Jones Act. Like, what would you estimate would be the labor force in the maritime directly related to Jones Act?
I have seen many numbers. It depends who you ask. If you ask the maritime trades, they will give you an estimate, astronomical, that is completely out of proportion. If you ask people who are against, they will say it's just a few.
Estimate?
But
I think.
According to. Dile de nuevo, ya.
This is not me. Says U.S. Seafarers by Sector and Type 2011 Occupational Employment Statistics Survey.
But the question
stop.
is, okay, but the question is that, remember, the maritime trades, it depends. You have, diverse. You have the shipping, you have.
30% of that total world commerce is for the specific ships.
Okay, let me put it.
No.
Let me put it this way, because I think this is the easiest way. If you check
Man hours.
Man hours, but if actually, and I don't like to use the man hours, but okay.
Yeah.
But if you check the whole sectors in the United States by industry, the maritime trade is one of the smallest one. It's just in a single percentage. It's not that big.
I guess I'll simplify my question. This reminds me of the steel tax that we're facing right now that only helps steel workers. And you try to make an argument that you're saving, say, 100 jobs, while that cost of 100 jobs is $1.5 billion annually to the people of Puerto Rico. How many jobs can you create with $1.5 million?
Well, the thing is, and this, one of the things that we are believing is that once we take the Jones Act, we are going to save that money. And I can tell you, all these arguments, every single one was used before when we bought the navieras. Most of you were around when Naviera was bought by the government. Every single argument. And the government went ahead and bought the navieras, run the navieras, bankrupted navieras. FYI, on the $72 billion, we're still holding that debt of navieras. And then when we were going to sell navieras, we used the same arguments. And we went ahead and sold navieras because transportation costs were going to be cheaper, all these situations were going to be fixed, so we bought navieras, sold navieras, and we have the same situation. Let's go back to 2006. We used to have el 6%, 6.6, el arbitrio at the ports. Every single, well, not every single good, that's another misconception. Some goods were actually taxed at 6.6%. What the merchants were doing is they were putting something in a container and they put another label on it not to pay the 6.6%.
Or behind the cargo in the front.
Actually,
OEM products, and in the back you had everything else.
yeah, all of a sudden you have notebooks, children clothes, that still we have children clothes and notebooks laying around if actually all the things that were actually saying they were imported were really imported. You know what happened after the 6.6 was changed to the sales tax? We didn't saw the prices of the goods in the island drop by 6.6%. It went to the pockets of the commerce. So one of the things, and one of the things that I really am afraid of is that we get rid of Jones Act, and all of a sudden the prices don't go down. And then what? Right now we can get rid of Jones Act. I will sign up. I really don't care about the Jones Act. But we don't have an economic model in place. And every single thing that we are doing in Puerto Rico doesn't make sense because we don't have an economic model. We just put forward a labor reform that is serving nothing. Even the people who push it forward are just using one article. Because when you do reforms, it's to serve a purpose. If you are doing an educational reform, it's to serve a purpose. If you are doing Y, X, and Z, it has to serve a purpose. Like for instance, if we are getting rid of the Jones Act, right now the biggest thing that we can do, and it will create jobs, is get of the Jones Act in the air traffic. Let us be like in Alaska, that they have an exemption because Jones Act works for vessels and for flights, airplanes. If we get rid of that, that's actually not hurting nobody because there's no jobs in the island because of that. We have two main airports that have never been used after we got it back, Ceiba and Raimi. And I don't see nobody actually pushing forward to get that. Most of these companies, the other thing, they're making a huge profit out of us. That's true. That's capitalism.
The gentleman here had a question.
I have the luxury of sitting back and letting you do all the hard work, and I get the easier job of just writing down what you say.
Yeah.
So, given that I apologize for having the easier job, but about half an hour ago, you did say that if the Jones Act exemption were enacted in Puerto Rico, the prices would go down, but there would be a cost of potentially jobs lost elsewhere. I mean, that's what you said. So, given that, following that scenario for a moment, there's something that that's sort of strange that concerns me. It's sort of there's two standards here, because we had a situation where to help the economy of Puerto Rico, we would have Puerto Rico be the transfer point where all the boats have to offload, reload, and offload for all the shipping to go into the United States in order to help create jobs in Puerto Rico. But it would increase the prices for everybody in the United States. How long would that reverse Alice in Wonderland Jones Act? It would last about 1 second, right? However, for 100 years, we've had exactly that situation being inflicted on Puerto Rico, the poorest jurisdiction in the United States. So under what rationale is it what's good for the goose is not good for the gander? It's not, we can inflict that on Puerto Rico, but God forbid we should think about doing it somewhere else. That's point one. And the second point is that it's an equal concern to me. We keep talking about the loss of jobs, but it seems to me that really it's a net job transfer, because the shipping, the unloading, the offloading, a lot of this activity would then would shift from Jacksonville to San Juan and Ponce and other ports. So what we'd be talking about is the creation of union jobs for union members in Puerto Rico. So, are we really talking about an objection to Puerto Rican workers being union members in Puerto Rico rather than protecting white people in Jacksonville?
Iram?
The thing is that we need to remember something. We are not talking just about the shipping yard workers. We are also talking about the people who works on those ships, the people who build those ships, and that's a whole nother scenario. What you're saying actually happens. You know, Ponce, we got Puerto Libre de las Américas, that is just sitting there. We spent $13 million in, I think it was like 2-3 cranes, that the only thing they're good for right now is to take photographs, because the US government never allowed the free zone to be established. That's there. That's a fact. But the whole thing is, and the main argument for us as trade union is are we really willing to sacrifice the well-being of workers?
But again, I need to, no, and I won't keep interrupting, but please remember, we're talking about the well-being of workers in Puerto Rico, who are the ones that are sustaining the price hikes. So why can't those jobs exist in the jurisdiction where the prices are being raised? We're talking about a transfer of jobs to where they belong in Puerto Rico.
But how do we transfer those jobs to Puerto Rico?
By exempting Jones Act for Puerto Rico from the Jones Act.
Okay, but how do
I agree and disagree with something he said. He said net transfer. There's actually not a net transfer. There's a subtraction. There's a subtraction of jobs in Puerto Rico, and I will tell you why. I actually managed Siemens for Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. The fact that you have to increase the cost of product in the island, that cost that you said that would be transferred to the commerce, that cost can be another person at the cash register. That cost can be another investment for when the hurricane comes, he can now repair his roof. That cost can go to providing a better education for his children. That cost difference can be go to investing in the island and creating more opportunities. So while I agree and disagree, you actually reducing the opportunities in the island. And I'm going to tell you, by doing commerce, it does hinge competition.
Look, I just...
Back on when you said electrical workers, welders, plumbers, all sorts of ancillary industries would resurface and rehabilitate themselves around those shipyards in Puerto Rico. So there would be secondary and even tertiary industry, restaurants, other service industries that would come to life.
But
the megapuerto could then be a reality.
Yeah, but unfortunately, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, because you know what is going to happen? It has happened. Right now, they can go build those ships in Puerto Rico, but they don't do it in Puerto Rico because it's cheaper to go somewhere else. They don't have any labor protections.
Well,
Like for instance, we have in Puerto Rico 2 areas. Once that the Jones Acts apply, and once another side of Puerto Rico, actually in San Juan, that the Jones Act doesn't apply. One is the shipping transportation, and the other one is the tourist area. Those cruise ships are not U.S. They are not subject to U.S. labor legislation.
can I?
And you can see the difference in the living standards. I am not willing to sacrifice the well-being of a worker to save just a couple of pennies out of my pocket. Because right now, there's a lot of things that we can do in Puerto Rico. Like, for instance, why we haven't, in 10 years, raised the minimum wage at all. Why the 2 administrations haven't raised the minimum wage?
Because you make it more expensive on top of the fact that their product is costing more, now the labor is costing more.
Hey.
Again, who gets hurt? The small business owner.
Can I get intervention here?
Yes.
Can I get intervention here?
Let's have the senator speak. And also, I want to add that a cost of life in Puerto Rico is not only increased just by the Jones Act. There's many tax laws within Puerto Rico and stuff like that. Exactly. So there's other ways that they could also start to cut down cost of living in Puerto Rico too. But Senator, I wanted to pass it to you. Have a thought.
When I start my speech, both of us says, get rid of the noise. Remember that? There is only just one question. If they're good, if they are the better ones, if they are the fastest ones, and they will get employees for whatever they want, why they don't compete? We are not asking them to leave Puerto Rico. We are just saying, compete. Compete. This is first. Secondly, this is not arguments. What I explained you before. This is not depends of who explain that statistics. I am giving to you statistics. I am giving to you evidence. I just ask them to put evidence in place, evidence in the table, and we will talk about it. But we cannot do a respectful communication without numbers. We are trying to explain this. They are getting less jobs. That is the truth. Less jobs with Jones Act. With Jones Act, and at the same time, why Ponce didn't work? You know what answer? Jones Act. Jones Act. Because when a smaller business in Puerto Rico, why you get bankrupt? Because it's more expensive for them. Ask Walmart. Ask Walmart. Why they put a Walmart materials in Jacksonville after Maria and not the smaller people business in Puerto Rico? Because Walmart paid them more. That is the truth. And you know what? This guy says, you eat what I want. You do it what I want. And that is not a democracy. That is not a democracy, but because he said, I would not sacrifice some jobs. You know what? I would not sacrifice 1.3 million people in Puerto Rico when you can develop more jobs for everyone, not for 26 people.
The gentleman in the back had a question.
Sí, yo me llamo Juan.
Juan, gracias.
Perfectamente. Yo quiero hacer mi pregunta en español, como es debido, ya que hablamos de Puerto Rico, y quiero la respuesta en español.
Claro.
Es evidente que la ley fundamental de toda relación comercial entre un país imperial y sus colonias es el beneficio del país imperial. Así se puede eliminar el Jones Act y los Estados Unidos, los gringos, van a inventarse una que lo que ponen en su lugar es igual de dañino para Puerto Rico. La única solución es que Puerto Rico por fin se levante los pantalones y se declare independiente. Uno de ellos, en términos de la moneda, existió una moneda puertorriqueña en el 98 y debe existir una de nuevo. Eso permite a un Estado independiente puertorriqueño modelar y dirigir su economía interna de una manera que se distribuya la riqueza y que el país se progrese y se mejore. También empezarán a haber negocios dentro de la isla que proveerán los puertorriqueños sus necesidades de otros productores dentro de la isla. Eso de importar cabrito de California, del quinto carajo, ya no va a ser un factor. Puerto Rico fue un país fértil que dio de comer a todas las Antillas que estaban bajo la caña de azúcar hasta que llegaron los gringos. La única manera de llegar a pensar el Jones Act es mandarlo a la mierda con los Estados Unidos.
El caballero acá y luego el caballero allá. Tienes una pregunta. Espérate, que él todavía... Disculpe.
Senadora, porque se ve que ha pensado el tema mucho. Siendo Puerto Rico independiente, ¿cómo usted arreglaría las leyes de cabotaje, las leyes de transporte de buque mercantil? ¿Usted piensa que se podría crear constructoras navieras en Puerto Rico? No hablo de las grandes navieras, sino de los pequeños barcos para que Puerto Rico, por ejemplo, pueda cosechar los comestibles del mar que está alrededor de la isla.
Yo no tengo ningún problema en hablar sobre estatus porque yo estoy clara que Puerto Rico es una colonia. Yo estoy clara con respecto a eso. Lo que sí es que yo no puedo esperar que Estados Unidos decida darle la independencia, el estatus, lo que sea, a Puerto Rico mientras la gente se está muriendo. Sin embargo, cuando la gente me habla de eso, yo quiero pensar a corto, mediano y largo plazo. Islas Vírgenes tiene exención completa. Islas Marshall también. Hawái quiere exención de las leyes de cabotaje. Yo hice vistas con la gente de Hawái. Los senadores y representantes de Hawái quieren la eliminación de ley Jones, pero usted sabe quién la quiere, los que están en el Congreso, porque le están dando dinero a los congresistas y eso es una realidad. Por lo tanto, si le dieron a Islas Vírgenes, si le dieron a Islas Marshall, ¿por qué no se la pueden dar a Puerto Rico? Además, nosotros no necesitamos al Congreso. Esa exención administrativa la puede dar el presidente de los Estados Unidos como lo acaba de dar 10 días. Ese en primer lugar. En segundo lugar, estábamos hablando aquí de los cruceros. Qué bueno que trajeron el tema de los cruceros. Los cruceros, vamos a ir a la historia en evidencia. Los cruceros entraron en una exención administrativa primero. Porque el FED dijo y ha dicho en innumerables ocasiones, vamos a darle una exención administrativa por 5 años. Y lo dijo el Premio Nobel de Economía también. Vamos a darle una exención administrativa para que compita todo el mundo, a ver cómo funciona la economía. ¿Qué pasó con los cruceros? Cuando se dieron cuenta que al eximir a los cruceros fue una buena decisión, hicieron la enmienda en la ley. Y usted sabe cuál es el principal ingreso ahora mismo en Puerto Rico que no ha caído. El de los cruceros. El de los cruceros. Ahí hay una evidencia de que empezaron por una exención administrativa y cuando se dieron cuenta que dio resultado, le tuvieron que dar la enmienda en la ley. Pero si nosotros no peleamos ahora, mientras peleamos otras cosas en lo que pensemos, en la estadidad, en la independencia, en el estadolibrismo, en lo que sea, pero a la misma vez no le decimos la verdad a la gente de las evidencias, de las estadísticas, la realidad es que nos estamos afectando todos y las compañías siguen siendo más fuertes. Ahora mismo, ya que me dio la oportunidad de hablar en español, porque me gusta mucho más. Ahora mismo, y le puedo enviar a todos la evidencia de peleas que hemos dado hace un mes atrás. Las dos compañías, Crowley y Toast, sometieron a la Comisión Federal Marítima el que puedan hacer un joint venture como han hecho con otras compañías que se las han comido para controlar todo el puerto de San Juan. Todo el puerto de San Juan. Y lo que hay detrás de todo esto es que han rentado ambas compañías con ese joint venture todo el puerto de San Juan. Todo es todo, lo que significa Puerto Nuevo y San Juan. Para si hubiese una exención o una entrada de los barcos internacionales, porque están entrando muchos barcos internacionales, si yo los rento y tú me los rentas a mí, ¿quién decide quién entra y quién no entra? ¿Yo? Por lo tanto, Toad tiene el del norte y Crowley tiene el del sur. Eso está maravilloso para no dejar entrar a nadie. Pero tampoco dicen que después del huracán María tenían una pelea en la bahía de quién entraba y quién no entraba y quién le daba más dinero para que entraran a Puerto Rico. Eso no lo dicen. O sea, aquí lo que hay que hablar es corto, mediano y largo plazo. Pero no nos podemos dejar y quedar en que unos piensen de una manera u otra. Trae los números a la mesa. Trae los números a la mesa y trabajamos qué es cierto y qué no es cierto, en qué nos podemos poner de acuerdo, en qué no nos podemos poner de acuerdo, porque usted sabe que todos somos puertorriqueños y nos está afectando. Y peor de todo esto, lo cual no voy a permitir, es que la gente se está muriendo. Muriendo. Y no es chiste.
Lo sé, yo estuve trabajando un tiempo con temas en Puerto Rico y le puedo decir frente a este aferro de que la política de Estados Unidos en Puerto Rico, eso es la diferencia entre Puerto Rico y las Vírgenes, Hawái y las Marshalls. La diferencia es una, que en Puerto Rico existen demasiados puertorriqueños. El día que Puerto Rico quede deshabitado por los puertorriqueños y vengan los gringos a la isla, todo se abrirá y todas las puertas se abrirán. Es una política que ellos tienen y han tenido desde el 98 de despoblar a Puerto Rico de los puertorriqueños. Para ellos, el problema no es un huracán, es que existan puertorriqueños en la isla. Esa es la clave de la política de decisión de Washington y de los gringos y sus allegados. Punto. El problema es que Puerto Rico tiene que ser independiente para poder defender sus intereses. Ese baile de los barcos, el baile más importante fueron los barcos cubanos, venezolanos, que trajeron ayuda a un país hermano y fueron cerrados la puerta.
El caballero aquí.
Pedro.
Disculpe, Juan. Ajá.
She pretty much answered my question, but I didn't want her to answer the question because Mr. Ramírez said earlier that there was a certain portion of ships that go directly into Puerto Rico and don't go to Jacksonville. And there are others that do go to Jacksonville. So my question with regards to, similar to what she's saying, is what determines, is it a law, is it a rule, is it a process? What determines what goes in direct and what does not? I asked the question because when he lifted the Jones Act, the food that was sent for the people for free was dumped to the side. And companies like Crowley, I know this personally, companies like, and I'm a Teamster, and that's Teamster Union, companies like Crowley refused to take the food. They took for profit. And they made deliveries for profit, not for people. And so my question to you is, who determines that? Is it Crowley? Is it the government? How is that regulated?
Okay, so the rule, and I want to address what the gentleman was saying before. The rule is, if they are going directly from any country, like for instance, meat or cement, if they go from Mexico to Puerto Rico and they don't make any stops, they can go there. If they make that, what they cannot do is, for instance, they go to Mexico and they stop in Jacksonville or let's say Canada. They go from Canada, stop at Pennsauken here in New Jersey, and stop to Puerto Rico. They cannot do that. If they go from Canada, let's say Maple Syrup, and go directly to Puerto Rico, they can go directly to Puerto Rico. What they cannot do is multiple stops. So that's the whole thing. What you were saying, and this is really interesting, this is something that a lot of people doesn't know. Those 11 ships that were sent to the island, you know who took advantage? Most of the companies. They needed to bring goods to the island, and they, of course, they wanted to save money. So they took the goods out of the regular ships. They used that exemption to ship those goods into the island. Believe it or not.
And they didn't lower the price.
And they didn't lower the price. Or they use a lot of loopholes. A lot of loopholes. And I can tell you a lot of stories. They gave us, and actually most of you here helped fill up those containers with goods going to the island. We got 3 containers sent from Pennsauken to the island of Puerto Rico. There were like 4 of us actually offloading those containers in the middle of San Juan because we could not find a place to put them. You know what the government decided in the middle of the travel? That we needed to pay tax. Yep. And it was really interesting because my union was sending generators to our members. All of a sudden, we needed to pay 11.5%. And I was like, what I'm supposed to do, tell the ship to go back?
But how is that if they're donations?
Because the government of the island does not work. It doesn't have any logic. Puerto Rico, the government in Puerto Rico is a logic-free zone. And addressing what the gentleman was saying, en español, que también lo prefiero más. La realidad es que el capitalismo tiene 2 fases. La fase del imperialismo político y la fase del imperialismo económico. El imperialismo político anexa y toma el control completo de las estructuras políticas y económicas de un país. Sea el que sea, sea la Unión Soviética, sea la Unión Soviética, que era el mayor expresor del imperialismo político, y Estados Unidos, que ahora mismo tiene a Puerto Rico en la fase del capitalismo económico, del imperialismo económico. Puerto Rico, si nosotros seguimos postergando la toma de una decisión, porque no es que Estados Unidos nos dé la independencia, es que nosotros tenemos un derecho inalienable a ella, que tenemos todos los países. Nosotros no vamos a resolver los problemas, porque Estados Unidos está en una situación que no hace lo que tiene que hacer y puede hacer para ayudar al país, pero tampoco nos deja hacer. Y un ejemplo que hemos utilizado del huracán. Mi papá, mi viejo, tiene 90 y pico de años, veterano de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Decía, ¿cómo es posible que en 1942, a 30.000 millas de distancia, a mí me llevaran balas, comida y agua? ¿Y cómo es posible que en el 2017, a 3.000 millas, a nosotros no nos puedan traer tan siquiera agua o comida? Porque es un puro interés económico de los Estados Unidos. Cuando se aprobó la ley 600, que tuvimos una constitución que no es ni de nosotros porque no las cambiaron, pudimos haber pedido unas extensiones de las leyes de cabotaje y no lo hicimos. Constantemente no lo hemos hecho. Algunos de los estudios que se han mencionado ahí establecen que Puerto Rico debe pedir una extensión del salario mínimo y que el salario mínimo no aplique en la isla para hacer Puerto Rico más competitivo. Y desgraciadamente en nuestra isla, la política que se ha institucionalizado es que low jobs is better than no jobs. ¿Y quién dijo eso? El papá fundador de lo que tenemos, que es el ELA. Y esa ha sido la lógica en el país. Nosotros no podemos seguir regalando nuestra mano de obra. ¿A qué se debe gran parte de la deuda que nosotros tenemos? Les voy a dar, y lo traigo por lo que trae el compañero, despoblar la isla, ley 20, ley 22. nos vertimos millonarios, nos vamos a Wall Street, nos vamos a la isla y yo no pago contribuciones, ¿verdad? Bien interesante, porque cuando en Puerto Rico tenía grandes niveles de producción, bajo las 936, esas compañías, ¿cuánto pagaban de contribución? 0, ¿verdad? Pero para mantener esa infraestructura industrial, ¿qué había que construir? Carreteras, puertos, utilidades. ¿Y cómo las pagábamos? Cogiendo prestados, cogiendo deuda. ¿Sabes? Y era bien cómodo. Entonces, yo no sé cómo nosotros podemos pretender y asumir que resolviendo nada más el asunto de la ley Jones y no resolviendo el problema de facto, que es un problema de estatus, y cuando resolvamos el problema de estatus, resolver el problema económico, porque para cambiar de un sistema capitalista a un sistema capitalista no vamos a resolver los problemas. Tenemos que resolver los problemas de fondo y es cambiando las estructuras económicas, porque todos los que estamos aquí, y ustedes saben muy bien cuál es el problema de la alternancia de partidos capitalistas. Porque tenemos a Trump y si nos acordamos, ¿quién fue el que nos aprobó NAFTA? ¿Quién nos aprobó a nosotros promesa? Fue Obama. Y salió corriendo. Él tenía la opción de no nombrar la Junta, pero la nombraron porque tenían que resolver el problema, que era que la deuda se le indilgaran a ellos. Así que pretender que resolver el problema de la ley Jones sin resolver el problema del estatus del país, no vamos a llegar a ningún lado.
Primero, caballero, disculpe, nos quedan 10 minutos. Yes. Nos quedan ya la última pregunta. Aquí el chico acá atrás.
Buenas tardes, mi gente. I have an important question. I mean,
I'm here for everything.
we talking about the Jones Act, but of course the Jones Act is only a symptom of the problem, right? The Jones Act is a symptom of the problem. What about jobs in Puerto Rico, right? When we talk about like the tax breaks that Puerto Rico get, like, you know, American companies get in Puerto Rico, American companies put their neoliberal policies in Puerto Rico. This happened throughout the 60s and 70s, right? And then when it became more beneficial, se fueron para República Dominicana. Y lo mismo se fueron para otro país, al bajo salario, right? At the end of the day, it's a race to the bottom, right? They keep going to the lowest wages, right? So, of course, apart from the Jones Act, right? Apart from the Jones Act, which is obviously hurting Puerto Rico, we talk about bringing back production to Puerto Rico, agricultural production, manufacturing to Puerto Rico, so that when a crisis hits, it's not only we can't be dependent on trade. We can't be dependent on just shipping. Although we're an island, and that's going to have to be a part of it, we can't only be dependent on that, number one. Number two, Puerto Rico independiente, Puerto Rico needs to be sovereign. Puerto Rico needs to be its own, it is its own nation, so it needs to be able to determine its own future. But the United States is not independent. The United States is part of NATO. The United States is part of NAFTA, right? Puerto Rico, the founding fathers of Puerto Rico, like Betances, Hostos, right, etc., they saw the need for the Confederación Antillana, right, in which Cuba, Puerto Rico, República Dominicana were able, we created a federation to defend themselves economically and politically. How are we going to survive climate change? Una unión. How are we going to bring the wages up, right? If companies, not just US companies, but European companies, Asian companies, continue to compete for the lowest prices products, even becoming independent is not going to be enough unless we make a union with the other nations that produce the same products and have the same economies, right? This is already taking place with CARICOM, with the Antillas Menores, ¿verdad? CARICOM. This already happened in Central America, and Andean has a customs union. We need a customs union with our brothers and sister nations to be able to bring higher wages, to be able to tackle on the challenges of the 21st century, like climate change, etc. So
I guess that's... Pero nos vamos a... can they stay around and talk to each other or mingle for a little while?
Although I do want to.
I know. La dama aquí, yo le había preguntado, le había prometido que le iba a coger la pregunta, pero por favor ya siéntanse que el evento culminó dentro de todo. You can stay and mingle around and ask questions and have more conversations. Or we know this is a very, very heated debate. Perfect. Vale, vaya.
A quick comment. I am aware of those containers that were the first donations getting hijacked, okay? We shipped 600,000 pounds October 2nd, and out of 14, 15 containers, 9 of them disappeared. So I'm well aware of the disappearance before it was elevated. But getting back to the Jones Act, my concern is this transit time. That where are the studies showing? I have a business in the food industry, and transit time, what you're pointing out as an average transit time of 24 days. How has that negatively impacted and created a health crisis to every Puerto Rican and every tourist that lands in Puerto Rico? Where is that evidence? Because you're speaking of developmental challenges, you're speaking of diseases, you're speaking of deaths, you're speaking of this is like Pandora's box. Why isn't this a crisis? That is not an average healthy transit time. I don't care if you put it on ice. So where are those studies? And why are we not amplifying that?
I can read you the stories that have been done in that by the University of Mayagüez, the room, have been done a lot of studies about that. This, first of all, and you can see, how many days you can put it in food. That is not quality at all. That is one. And then many people in Puerto Rico, when they get food, especially vegetables, the same day they put it out of the market, they need to throw it away.
Of course it's right. Even when it's chemically treated.
Yeah, it's true. And there is another thing, but the cost, because the refrigerator, si es la diferencia entre congelado y refrigerado, el costo es diferente. Uno más caro que el otro. Exactly. But I can read to you all the stories that have been done. Yeah, so everybody. You can give me all the emails and I can bring it to you from people from the Mayagüez that have been doing a lot of stories about this. But let me say that the last...
Same transit time to Alaska? Is that the same transit time to Hawaii?
No.
Then why,
it's more.
It's more for us.
Yeah, it's more for us.
Well, one of the things...
Well, because... sorry. Because the inland transportation, especially, because most of the things go to California, and then you need to travel it through United States and put it in Jacksonville. Remember that New Jersey was closed. Before that, you go from some like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, that they
I delivered a car there.
Yeah, they close it. So for that, Horizon goes out too. That is one of the reasons that Horizon goes out.
No, actually.
And in some occasions, but generally, I can bring you to you all the stories about this. Yeah, it's true. We evidence before after Maria that we didn't get the food at the time. It was not the government. You know who controls the port? FEMA. FEMA was the one that controlled the port.
Just to start wrapping up, sorry.
And FEMA get contracts with Crowley and Toll.
So final thoughts on, what we have this really frank conversation, all sides. What final thoughts on really what's the next step towards working to what would work best for Puerto Rico in terms of the Jones Act?
Just one quick point. on what you're saying, because that's new to me. I know the routes, and I don't know they take that long. But one of the things that I know, and this is something, in Puerto Rico, one of the situations that we have is there's a tax on the inventory. So on top of everything, so that's one of the situations. So that's why there's a lot of small inventory at hand, because you are getting taxed. And actually, you are getting taxed every single year that things are still there. So I told you, Puerto Rico is a logic-free zone, the government. The main thing for us is I don't want to see a Walmartization or Walmatizar the maritime trade for us. I don't want to have and see what I see in the cruise ships happening, that once you get sick and you are too costly for those companies, they'll throw you out. Walk in Old San Juan and ask some of the extranjeros there, why are they there? They got sick, they got injured, they don't have any protections, and the cruise ship just told them, you can stay here. So if we are really willing, are the Puerto Rican government willing to pass laws that require labor protections to those shipping companies? To require collective bargaining?
But isn't that a question for Promesa?
No, that's a question for the government of Puerto Rico, to recognize those rights.
But who's controlling
Sorry.
Puerto Rico right now?
But no, that's not a budget issue. That's a policy issue. That is different. Puerto Rico has never actually controlled itself, because it's Congress who has the whole authority in the government on the island. What we have for the past almost 70 years is a mimic of government.
Sorry, guys. The staff here needs to go home. Let's give a hand to please our guests, Senator Rossana and Iram. Thank you so much for everybody for coming here, and hopefully we can continue this conversation elsewhere.